Hi, this charming and handsome fellow here is one of the initial set of 14 miniatures released for Warhammer 40,000, which was a mixed bag of humans and alien troops, and some of which didn't even survive long enough to get into the Rogue Trader rulebook. On the other hand, the orcs, such as this orc with a blaster, as he was called at the time, I believe, prospered quite well, and they are a major force in the game. And since by the time this video goes up, we shall be in the blessed month of Orktober, I thought I would take a look at how the figures had developed from this initial production model right the way up to the latest releases. With the release of Rogue Trader, the orcs were given an entire range of figures, and all of them to begin with were single pose metal models. And some of them, like this example here, were available in blister packs, although there was also a box set which contained a very specific set of single pose metal models. There were a few leaders and some infantrymen, and although there were 4 different types of infantrymen in, they all had the same very basic pose. That set was called Thrug Bullnecks Orc Raiders, and it was based around the initial scenario presented in the Rogue Trader rulebook. The orcs were given quite a major overhaul towards the end of Rogue Trader, with the introduction of the various clans that we now know of, and with those came a whole new range of figures. And by this time, the fashion was to have a metal-bodied figure with separate plastic arms and weapons, just like this example of a blood axe boy here. Although I should point out that the dagger he is wielding actually comes from the contemporary Space Marine figures. The close combat weapons available to these figures were a chainsword, a power fist, and then there was a hand axe. At the same time as the hybrid plastic and metal figures were released, a box set of fully plastic multi-part figures was also released, and this was also common at the time. The same conditions applied to the Imperial Guard and the squats, and in that set you got, I think it was 36 plastic orcs. The heads you had to glue onto the torso and legs separately, and then the arms and the weapons were the exact same sprues that were used with the hybrid plastic and metal models that were introduced at the same time. While Games Workshop was releasing its hybrid plastic and metal figures and also the multi-part plastic orcs, at the same time, Marauder Miniatures, which was another subsidiarity of Games Workshop, produced a small range of single-pose metal models. They only did orcs for Warhammer 40,000. They did a total of 8 of them, I think, 7 of whom had bolters, like this example here, and the other one had a bolt pistol. By this time, the idea of squad leaders with different weapons amongst orcs was sort of disappearing, so I'm not sure what the idea behind having just one figure like that was. But this little range represented Marauder's only foray into Warhammer 40,000. Other than that, all they did was fantasy miniatures. So that makes this figure from the Rogue Trader era quite an interesting one from a historical point of view. With the release of 2nd edition, the format of the rules changed from being available in a single large book, as the case was for Rogue Trader, although that was, of course, then supplemented by other rules updates, and instead we got several books and a lot of figures in a starter box set. And that set included a number of these single pose plastic Goth orcs. These were also made available separately, so you could just buy more and more orcs without also having to buy the other figures that came in that set, and you could reinforce your army quite cheaply. These were sort of like a supplementary set of models to the previous Rogue Trader vintage models. Those weren't deleted just yet. Later on in second edition, Games Workshop in fact expanded slightly upon its range of metal-bodied orcs with plastic arms and weapons, and they released several snakebite orcs, such as this one, as well as some Goths, what they called Scar Boys, which would have been elite troops at the time. One big difference was, though, that they changed the weapon sprues, and the bolter that this model has is not the same as the bolter that was on the original weapon sprue during Rogue Trader. The orcs got a range refresh towards the end of second edition, and this is owing to the release of the specialist boxed game Warhammer, and contained a number of multi-part plastic figures, such as the one you see here. These were fully compatible with Warhammer 40,000 itself, and so they were able to supplant and eventually replace that range of figures. It should be noticed that these, in size terms, are slightly smaller than the preceding generation of orc miniatures. And that's a bit strange for Games Workshop, because normally, as they change the size of their figures, they make them steadily larger. In this case, though, they went the other way, and that is probably to do with the mechanics of Warhammer, which featured cramming as many figures as you could onto a model vehicle. As well as the multi-part plastic figures for Warhammer, Games Workshop also produced a range of single-pose metal orcs that were in the same style and to the same scale, and these effectively replaced the existing Warhammer 40,000 range, and when third edition was released, it was these models that were used for images of orc armies involved in tabletop games. The Warhammer style orcs didn't last long, though, because with the release of the third edition Orc Codex, they got a complete range refresh again. So that's 3 complete refreshes in 3 editions. And among these, for your basic troops, were these multi-part plastic figures. You had the choice of equipping them either with a shooter, as it was now called. They didn't call them bolters anymore. The different races had different names for their weapons instead of all using the same ones. Or you could have a slugger and a chopper. But that was it. For the plastic set, you only got your basic infantryman in it with no other specialist options. For the more specialist troops, such as this orc boy with a big shooter, Games Workshop produced a range of single-pose metal models in the same style as the plastics, and these were available in blister packs, as well as a big shooter. You could have a rocket launcher. There were also burner boys, and there were upgrade sprues for the plastic orcs if you wanted to give your squads superior armour or grenades. In 4th edition, the multi-part plastic kit was updated quite considerably. As you can see, the style of the orcs is pretty much identical, and I'll tell you that it was quite difficult going through my collection to positively identify one that came from 3rd edition amongst all of the 4th edition orcs I had. And the major change in this box set was the orcs that had previously been available only as metal or with metal parts onto the plastic bodies, so that's all the specialist weapons. They all got roped in to the standard Orc Boys box set. So as well as your shooters and your sluggers and your choppers, you now had the option of giving them rocket launchers and big shooters. The orcs also benefited from what I call the pocket money sets of figures, where Games Workshop released a number of easy to assemble, they just clip together figures, and you got between 3 and 5 of them in a set for about £5. And in the case of the orcs, you got 4 orcs such as this one with a slugger and a chopper. Now we get to 5th edition, which is my personal favourite edition of Warhammer 40,000, and that's not just because of the rule set, which I think was the best, but also because I think it had the best starter set, the Assault on Black Reach, and that included 2 squads of easy-to-assemble orcs with sluggers and choppers such as this one. And I like that so much, I must have bought about half a dozen of the basic starter sets so I could get all these orcs. And I think since then I've bought even more of them off the internet because it was a really cheap way to get a lot of very nice figures. After the orcs getting serious releases in the first 5 editions of Warhammer 40,000, things quietened down a bit, right the way up until 9th edition, when the new codex was initially released with a set of these orcs, the Beast Snaggers, where we get some sort of techno-barbarian version of the orcs. And the style has changed slightly. They become more upright. The bodies are still very muscular, but the heads are ever so slightly smaller, although the differences aren't so great that you can't get these to blend in with the existing range of figures. Very shortly after the Beast Snaggers were released, and when the Orc Codex came out independently though, a new set of Orc Boys was released with the sculpts now in the same style as the Beast Snaggers. And you've got a couple of squads of these in the Combat Patrol box set. The strange thing about these, though, is the weapon options you've got. These are easy to assemble figures. They will clip together, and you don't get much in the way of weapon options at all. You do get a specialist for each squad who can have either a big shooter or a rocket launcher. But the regular boys, you have to have, I think it's 5 of them with slugger and chopper, or in this case, a grenade instead of the chopper, and 3 of them with shooters. So the numbers just don't really add up, because taking mixed weapons in a squad just doesn't seem like a very good thing to do on the tabletop. You either want to be providing covering fire from a distance with your entire squad, or your whole force advancing forward to rip the enemy apart at close range. And I think that might be why, although these figures are available outside of the Combat Patrol set in their own boxed squad set, that squad set is in fact only available for mail order at the moment, whereas the previous generation of Orc Boys, that goes all the way back to 4th edition, are still available on store shelves. Of course, Orc Society isn't just made up of orcs, and an orc army can go into battle accompanied by swarms of runts in addition to all the boys. And in accordance with this, Games Workshop has released a nice range of Gretchen over the years. And this single pose metal figure is in fact another of the original 14 figures released just prior to the Rogue Trader rulebook. Gretchen were also given their own range of figures under Rogue Trader. This was more limited than the range of figures available for orcs, with all of them being armed with weapons such as blunderbusses, muskets and shotguns. And this is because under the Rogue Trader rules, Gretchen were considered too stupid to use more advanced weapons such as bolters and auto guns. The starter set of 2nd edition also included quite a number of Gretchen troops, and by this time the intelligence requirement for using various pieces of equipment had been dropped, and all of these single-pose Gretchen were armed with auto guns instead of more primitive shotguns and muskets. A number of single-pose metal Gretchen were also released during 2nd edition, designed to be of a similar style to those in the starter set, and these were equipped either with an auto gun again, like the single-pose plastic ones of that set, or, like this individual, they had an auto pistol and a close combat weapon instead. Gretchen also featured in the WAAARGH game that was released towards the end of 2nd edition, and because of this they got their own range of figures for that game, and these became used with Warhammer 40,000 as well. These were only available though as single pose metal models. There were no multi-part plastics because they weren't in the original box set. They came in an expansion that was released later on. The single-pose metal figures from WAAARGH continue to be the Warhammer 40,000 Gretchen range right up until 5th edition, at which point they were replaced by a box set of multi-part plastic figures, and this also included a runt herd to keep an eye on them, although the style of the figures in fact remained the same, so you can mix and match the previous metal figures with these multi-part plastic figures freely without your units looking at all odd. And in fact, although this set was released in 5th edition, it is still current today. It may have been reboxed, and of course the price has gone up a bit, but is still exactly the same sculpts and sprues. Going in the opposite direction from Gretchen, and we have the larger orc knobs, and as well as just being leader and character models, these can be fielded in squads of their own, so I am going to field them in this video about the available infantry forces for orcs. And this particular figure here is from Rogue Trader. It is a single pose metal figure, and it is one of the ones that came in a blister pack rather than one of the Thulg Bullneck's Orc Raider models, and those models were specialist poses for that box set, although they did become available from mail order. I don't think they were ever released in a blister pack. When the Orc range was refreshed later on in Rogue Trader, the Orc knobs were refreshed along with it, and they too became metal-bodied figures with plastic arms and weapons, and were produced according to specific clans, like many of the Orc boy figures were, so that's why we've got this Evil Son figure here. And the arms and weapons for the Orc knobs were in fact the same ones used on the Orc boys. So here you can actually see the original design of Bolter, which, as I mentioned earlier, was updated for 2nd edition. Although the 2nd edition starter set didn't include any character models, in the slight expansion to the existing Orc range in 2nd edition that Games Workshop carried out, it did include a number of Goth knobs such as this one. And again, it's a metal body with plastic arms and weapons, and the arms and the weapons are the same type used on the contemporary Orc boy figures. 2nd edition also saw the introduction of the idea of the mega armoured orc knob, and this is an example of such a figure. This is a multi-part metal model. The arms are separate, and the backpack and banner pole had to be glued into the back of the torso, and I think all of them may have been marked out as being Bad Moons, perhaps because the armour was supposed to be so expensive they were the only clan who could afford to buy it. New Orc knob figures were also released as part of the WAAARGH range, and like the Gretchen, you didn't actually get any plastic multi-part Orc knobs in the box set, so they were only available as metal models separately in blisters. And again, these took over from the previous generations of Orcs in the main Warhammer 40,000 game. The refresh of the Orc range in 3rd edition, of course, brought along with it some new Orc Nob figures, and these are in the same general style as the plastic Orc boys, but larger, and these are multi-part metal figures that initially were available in a box set of 5, and I think they may have been available separately in blisters later on. But these gave you several arm and head options, and I think you also had the banner bearer that was released in that set of 5 originally. 3rd edition also saw the Mega Armor Orcs updated to match the new style, and these came individually in blisters, and you got weapon options on them in the form of you picked which right arm you wanted. This particular version has a combination of shooter and scorcher, but you could also get, I think it was a twin-linked shooter or a shooter with a rocket launcher. The weapon on the right arm at this stage for Mega Armor was always a Power Claw. Moving on to 4th edition and the update to the standard boys multi-part plastic set also included parts so you could make one of the boys into a knob instead, and this was achieved with a bulkier torso and weaponry that was oversized compared to the standard Orc boys. Although he does look bigger than a standard Orc boy, he isn't quite as large as the existing knob figures, which were still the multi-part metal figures at this time. The Salt on Black Reach set for 5th edition gave us some properly scaled plastic Orc knobs, and these were single pose plastic figures. You got 5 of them in the set. I think you intended to field them as a squad of their own, of elite troops, although they did make perfectly serviceable squad leaders if you wanted to field them in that way. Later on in 5th edition, a new box set of plastic Orc knobs was released, and these were multi-part figures designed to replace the old metal ones, and you got a wide variety of weapon options in this, as well as extra little bits and pieces like spare armor plates and packs to go on belts and various back poles, as you can see on this figure here. In addition to the standard slugger and chopper for all the figures, you had options for power claws, combi weapons, and big choppers. And in fact, this kit has remained current right up to the present day. There were still more Orc Nob releases to come though, and in 7th edition, the metal Mega Knobs gave way to a box set of 3 plastic models, and in this set, as well as being able to assemble them purely as Mega Knobs, you also actually had the option to assemble one of them as a big mech character model in Mega Armor. Moving on to 9th edition now, and when the Beast Snagger range was released, the standard Beast Snagger squad also included the option to make one of the boys into a knob. So this particular figure has the same characteristics as they do. It has the more vertical stance, it's far less hunched, and the head again is slightly smaller, making the upper torso appear much bigger than on the previous designs. And the final figure I'll take a look at here today is this one, and this is the Orc Nob from the 9th edition Orc Boys squad set, and he is not an optional upgrade. You have to assemble one of them as a knob, so because of that he has a proper knob scaling, much like comparing the multi-part plastic set from 5th edition and the 3rd edition multi-part metal set to their contemporary Orc Boys, rather than the slight size increase offered by the option of the knob leader in the 4th edition multi-part boys set or the 9th edition Beast Snagger set. And he has the same sort of smaller head style as the latest design of orcs have. Although to say he's more vertical isn't quite accurate, because all of the orc knobs seem to have a more vertical pose than the orc boys, which only goes to exaggerate how large they are. However, he is only available as part of that set, so he has the same sort of limited availability as that one does. And in fact, it is still the 5th edition version of Orc knobs that you will encounter most commonly. And I will close, as ever, with an overview of all the models I've been looking at today, so that you can see them compared to one another. We've got the runts down at the front. Then we move on to the boys from our initial 14 releases, going through the first couple of editions. And then on to the far more modern style that began at 3rd edition. And this is the point where I've been rebasing them all to the current 32mm bases. And then at the back, I've got the couple of rows of knobs, including the mega knobs. And of course, I've not included some of the more super specialized orcs in this, so I don't have the tank busters, the burners, the looters, the commandos, or the storm boys, but they by and large just followed the same sort of design styles as the regular orc boys anyway. So I shall wish you a happy Orktober. Hope you enjoyed watching this little review of orc figures over the years, and thanks for watching. Bye.